Okay, so welcome everyone, and thanks so much for taking time today to join us for our US RAiD pilot initial stakeholders call. Your hosts today are from Lyrasis, GoFAIR US, the San Diego Supercomputer Center, and RAiD, which is coming from the Australian Research Data Commons, or ARDC. And many thanks to our colleagues from Australia who are calling in at 6 a.m. their time right now. So in this session today, we're going to do some introductions first. We'll hear an introduction to RAiD, so we'll learn more about RAiD itself. You'll get an overview of the US RAiD pilot that we're planning. You'll hear some RAiD use case examples, and then we'll wrap up by talking about what is involved for organizations that are interested in participating in the pilot, and then we should have some time for questions and discussion toward the end. For introductions, I'm going to now introduce our US RAiD pilot staff. So I'm Sheila Rabin. I'm the Senior Strategist for Research Infrastructure Programs at Lyrasis. We also have Christine Kirkpatrick, the Division Director for Research Data Services at the San Diego Supercomputer Center, or SDSC, which is part of the University of California at San Diego. We also have Chris Erdman, Head of Open Science at SciLife Lab Data Center, and also involved in data initiatives at SDSC. Additionally, we have Julie Christopher, our Technical Project Manager at SDSC, and Kevin Coakley, our Senior Cloud Integration Engineer at SDSC. And then RAiD staff at the Australian Research Data Commons, or ARDC, Natasha Simons, Director of National Coordination for the ARDC, Sean Ross, Manager of National Infrastructure Initiative Products, and also Product Manager for RAiD at ARDC. And then we also have Matthias Liffers, Product Manager for Persistent Identifier Services at ARDC. So this is kind of our project team, and we're very happy to meet you all. Okay, so one thing I forgot to mention in the introductions is we also want to acknowledge that this project, this US RAiD pilot, is possible thanks to grant funding from the National Science Foundation. And now I will turn it over to Sean to take us through an introduction to RAiD. And Sean, just tell me next slide whenever you're ready.
Will do. Will do. Thanks, thanks, Sheila. I'm not usually a morning person, so I'll do my best today to stay coherent and not ramble too much. So RAiD, as it says in the slide, global system to uniquely identify projects. RAiD is a persistent identifier for research projects, but it's more than that too. We also aim, and you'll hear a little bit more about this a bit later as well. We also aim, in some ways, to be not only sort of DOI-like as an identifier, but also ORCID-like in providing a registry of a global registry of research projects. So we provide ways to edit information about the projects, share that information. Next slide, please. RAiD collects, and you'll see a bit of a diagram about this later, disparate information about research outputs and inputs of various kinds, people, organizations, samples, instruments, etc. Next slide. Oh, this might actually be an animation. I borrowed some of Matthias's slides and forgot to run through them to see where they were animated. RAiD acts to bring together these other entities. Next slide. Into something that's a little bit more intelligible, and that we aim to be both human and machine readable. That brings some organization to the different research activities that are connected with a project. And we've always thought that or contended that a project is the natural place to bring these things together, because it will capture that most research happens in the context of a research project, whether that's individual or collaborative, whether it's grant funded or not. So like, to take my own field, in my research life, I'm a historian and an archaeologist. Historians, often still work alone. Archaeologists often work in large teams. Historians, some go their whole lives without ever winning a major grant. A large archaeological project will win a series of grants. So it's really discipline agnostic, and it's meant to bring together these different things. And whether or not a project is funded, whether or not a project is collaborative, and capture that bigger picture, longer term activity that's associated with research, which, as we'll discuss again later, opens up some new reporting opportunities. Next slide. So it's often good, I think, to start with at least a working definition of a research project. When we were setting up our collaboration with DataCite, they did a very nice, sort of some work on research projects. It also informed their addition of research projects as a type in DataCite's metadata schema. You'll see a working definition we have here, a planned endeavor that has allocated resources and aims to achieve a particular aim. But I would say we're being fairly liberal about this as far as RAiD is concerned. We want to see how people use RAiD and what they use it for. There are some guardrails, but we're at a stage where we're producing more sort of good practice guides than we are hard and fast rules about what you can do or can't do. We want to see how people use it. Next slide, please. So again, you're now getting it perhaps a bit more explicit or detailed about it. So what is a RAiD? It's if you boiled it down, it's a persistent identifier with an accompanying metadata record. And when the slides are distributed, you can click through that link and see a RAiD. Next slide. And largely how this works in practice is that a RAiD is mostly, not entirely, but mostly a collection of other persistent identifiers, plus a small amount of metadata that's generally not available elsewhere, like a title, a description, start and end dates. There's a subject area, keywords, a few other things that you can, a few other pieces of key metadata that you can add. But otherwise, you'll see, if you look at a RAiD, it's generally a collection of other identifiers, ORCIDs, RORs, that are sometimes further qualified. And whenever we could further qualify, we used existing schemas to describe the things attached to it. So, for example, you'll see in this one here, in this schematic representation here, that if we want to talk about what role an investigator is playing, we use the credit ontology for that. Next slide, please. So if you can then build a graph out from this with a RAiD at the center that has various inputs, the grants, data sets, software, etc., various outputs, which may also be software, data sets, publications, can even be grants. Some projects have funding that they distribute. And you can take RAiDs and you can relate them to one another as well. And we offer a number of qualified relationships there. The most commonly used one probably being has part sort of relationship that lets you do parent-child relationships in grants. So you can have a hierarchical in projects. So you can have a hierarchical relationship between projects. Next slide. So what does a RAiD, why do this? A lot of it's out of is for efficiency. I think again at my own practice, over the years I've had Word documents, Google documents, Confluence pages where I have to keep the core information about a project because I keep getting asked this information in research information systems, grant applications, etc. RAiD provides a single source of truth for projects that can be shared and integrated with other systems. We've a few years ago, MoreBrains did a report on the potential savings and the efficiency gains are significant, particularly when RAiD is combined with other identifiers. It also helps with reporting. A project is a good vehicle for an organization to look at if they want to report on results of internal funding, what kind of external funding they get, what they do with the external funding, what the outcomes from that are, and also for say grant providing organizations. The RAiD will give a longer term, larger scale picture of activities associated with a project that got a grant at some point from that organization. Transparency, I think it contributes to open science in that you can see the history and activities and people and organizations and funding, et cetera, in a project. These also can act as trust markers to show that this team has been working together for a long time, and the resulting outputs are probably not from a paper mill because they're part of a coherent whole. Interoperability, we expose the data in ways that allow it to be reused in various ways, and it's stable. You can count on it being there. Next slide. So how is RAiD different from other ways that you might potentially identify a project? So we have implemented a project-specific metadata schema. So there's no sort of trying to work out exactly how you fit information about a grant into another schema. Multi-party administration, we have a service where you can log in using a variety of identity providers and grant permissions to other people, and this allows granular access to a RAiD that lets groups in collaborative projects work together to keep a metadata record updated. We know projects change over time, so RAiDs are dynamic, and versioning is handled automatically. Every few edits, you get a new version. We'll bundle them up if you make a bunch of edits at the same time, and a new version is made. You can interrogate that metadata history, but the users don't have to worry about actually publishing new versions or anything like that. This is just done in the background. A big one for a lot of organizations. Yes, I will provide links to anything that you need here. So I can. That was maybe a request to put them in the chat now. Maybe when I'm done talking, I'll do that. Auto-generated landing pages, like ORCID, once you've put in your metadata information, a landing page is generated. So the metadata schema as well is customizable, and what might be most relevant in this context is that registration agencies have a local area of the metadata where they can add things that cater to their community. If this works out and it looks like it would be useful for others, those can then be promoted into the main part of the metadata. And controlled vocabularies can be modified. So in the US, you'll use for subjects probably what Library of Congress subject headings or something, whereas we have Australia, New Zealand field of research codes. And I think we're really starting to get a good community around RAiD as well, that can support new RAiD users and organizations. Next slide. This refers to the study that I mentioned earlier about RAID's potential. Even in Australia, where we've got about 20,000 projects a year, I should have done the math here for the US because it's too early in the morning for me to do this in my head. We probably save about 3,000 person days a year from the avoiding the double entry of project metadata. As you could, the projected number of projects in the US at the time in 2022 was about 625,000 projects, so orders of magnitude bigger. So there's a great potential savings, particularly when it's combined with grant publication grant PIDs. Next slide. For more, you can look at RAiD.org, which we've recently re-implemented, or if you send an email to contact@raid.org, it'll raise a ticket. It won't just be to me, so somebody will get back to you quickly, and you can hear more about RAiD. And I think that's it. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Sean. All right, Christine, over to you.
Yeah, and Sean, we did put those links in the chat. So
thanks.
We got a posse today, so we've got you. I really feel for you. Thank you again for making the time so that we could accommodate many time zones. So just one quick slide here for me. If you can go to the next slide, Sheila. Oh, sorry, I guess I went too quick. There we go. Okay. So just a quick slide on timeline. So this is a 2-year award, and we planned accordingly. So we're in the first phase, not quite over, which is where we're doing things like creating all the communication channels, doing all the back-end coordination, checking our technical plan. Because of course, when you write proposals, there's a time lag between you propose and then you get. So sometimes things have changed, and sometimes in a good way. And then starting to talk to stakeholders about their expectations, their needs. Concurrent with that, we've been working on the technical pieces, some of which are also contractual, and figuring out what we need to have in place for the first people through this to use it, the very alpha people. And then getting close to September is when we will start the workflow, work with the ARDC on some easy to use tools and making sure that all the documentation is there for using the API, et cetera. And then concurrent with this September and the end of the project, it'll really be the wrap up things, community outreach that feeds back into improving things, figuring out what next steps might be for those who follow or those who take it further, and making sure that all of you, our stakeholders, see how it went. And then, of course, there's all the other stuff down here at the bottom that we'll do throughout the project. And so this is just kicking off the first of many communications that you'll hear from us, if you indicated that you wanted to. Back to you, Sheila.
Great, thank you, Christine. Okay, so over the course of the pilot, one of the things that we are going to be doing is determining a sustainable business model for RAiD services in the US. So that is a big part of this pilot, in addition to just kind of testing out the RAiD infrastructure and getting things documented. We want to make sure that the ability to use RAiD in the US is accessible and sustainable to any organization that might want to use it over time. So Lyrasis, which is the organization that I work for, and if you're not familiar with Lyrasis, it's a nonprofit organization that historically serves primarily libraries, archives, and museums with various access to open source software and other kinds of services. One of the things that Lyrasis also does that I'm responsible for is managing some persistent identifier communities in the United States. So we already have 2 persistent identifier or PID community programs that we're already managing. And so we're kind of looking to these for, examples of how the US RAiD services might unfold. The first of our communities is an ORCID consortium for any nonprofit non-federal government organizations in the United States. Right now we have over 200 organizations participating in that. It's been really successful so far, primarily because it is a consortium approach. So it's many organizations coming together, working together as a community of practice, and it allows for kind of a cost sharing or lower costs per organization, which makes things kind of more accessible and more sustainable for everyone. So with our ORCID US community, for example, there's a tiered fee structure based on the total annual operating budget of each participating organization. And all of those organizations get access to 5 premium ORCID member API keys, in addition to many other benefits. So that's kind of one model that we're already working with. The other one is our Lyrasis DataSite US community. So this is a DataSite consortium for organizations that want to assign DOIs to their own local materials. And that one is also open to any nonprofit in the US. That one has a tiered fee structure that is not based on annual operating budget, but rather on the total number of DOIs that each organization registers annually. So that's a little bit of a different model, but of course, all participating organizations really get access to be able to create as many DOIs as they need. So these are 2 programs and 2 models that we're already working with, and ideally, we would like to establish something similar for RAiD in the US. And we will definitely be looking for feedback and input from participating pilot organizations as we move through the next couple of years to figure out what that model for RAiD will ultimately look like. So just giving you a little preview and peek behind the scenes here of some examples of what we're hoping will come towards the end of this RAiD pilot. So now back to Christine for some RAiD use case examples.
Yeah, and just another reminder, thank you NSF for providing the community and all of us with this time so that we, can start out trying things out, which some of these use cases will suggest while we work on the sustainable business model. So this is what really excites me is the selfish part of it, which I've needed something like RAiD for a lot of time. I think many people have. So one of the people that I collaborate with closely, Dr. Shankar Subramaniam here at UC San Diego, he leads a very big lab. He does many projects in the multi-omic space. He holds positions in bioengineering, computer science, or School of Medicine. And so he has groups that span more than just things that are under his organizational chart. One of those is the National Metabolomics Data Resource, aka the Metabolomics Workbench. And so this is a group of people spread between our School of Medicine, the Department of Bioengineering, and the San Diego Supercomputer Center. We create things as part of Metabolomics Workbench, but we also get data deposits, and we have people that write publications based on the tools that we put out in the workbench, the aggregate data, some of our example analysis. And so it would be wonderful if we had a way to collect things just for that metabolomics piece of the work, and not things that are connected to Professor Subramaniam, for example. Next slide. So another example is the funder, and I think I saw in the participants we have a couple people on here. Dr. Plato Smith, again, thank you for, he's not on today, but if he ever sees the recording, thank you for this award that makes this possible. So he's an example of someone who could also use a RAiD. So he manages a portfolio of projects under the Fair and Open Science public access umbrella, and these are just a few of them. Hopefully we'll hear some new awards soon. There was just a call in April for new ones. And it would be nice for him to be able to go out and collect and say, okay, if you've tagged your output as part of this portfolio, here's all the publications, here are all the presentations, and other things that might not really make it into the reports, or might be difficult to quickly get with a query, like that would be made possible after he uses RAiD and implements it. Next slide. And for those of you on the call that manage e-infrastructures or research infrastructures, I know we call them different things depending on where you are. So one that I'm involved in is the Open Storage Network. And this is another place where we will definitely be using some of the findings from one of the FAIR US RCNs that talked about how to use persistent identifiers for facilities. But in our case, it's a network, so it's made up of many different facilities. And then again, as with the Subramaniam example, we produce materials, but then people also build things based on the infrastructure that's out there. And so it would be really nice and not just nice, but critical for us to be able to show the full impact that this resources has had on the research community. And just to note, SciLife Lab is looking to adopt this also for their research computing infrastructure. Next slide. So this is very similar to the slide that Sean showed, but again, just to punch it up, these are the sort of things that Professor Subramaniam, Dr. Plato Smith, and us at the Open Storage Network, or Chris at SciLife Lab would really love to be able to collect, again, with minimal work. You know, right now, this can take months to collect, and it's often not complete. Next slide. And in addition to SciLife Lab, of course, this is not just a US activity. RAiD adoption is also underway in the EU through the work of ARDC partnering with SURF in the Netherlands. I wanted to draw your attention to this use case that comes from Finland, where they've employed this. They're using it to do just what Sean described, collect PIDs. And we'll put the link in the chat in case you want to take a closer look at this. Back to you, Sheila.
All right, wonderful. So let's talk about, for organizations that are interested in participating in the pilot, which many of you expressed that you are, let's talk about what is involved and what we're expecting might be involved. So the first step would be to determine your initial RAiD use cases. So we've given you some examples here, thinking about your organization and your context and whether you would want to register RAiDs for projects that your organization is involved in or leading, or potentially if your organization doesn't kind of manage projects, but you might be interested in including RAiDs in your workflows. So for example, if you're involved in publishing and want to include RAiDs in publication workflows, that would be a really good idea because as many of us know, PIDs work best when they're kind of all connected together. So the first step is really just starting to think about your organization, your context, and how you might want to use RAiD. From there, we'll ask for you to share your RAiD use case ideas with us. On the next slide, I'll show a submission form that we have available. So sharing those use cases, and then we'll work with you to get those documented. Ultimately, we would like to not only collect use cases, but document them, and if appropriate, share them out with the broader community to give other organizations more ideas about how they can use RAiD and start to kind of build a community of practice around RAiD. So that's kind of the second step. Aside from getting those use cases, documenting them, sharing them, once we have the RAiD technical infrastructure in place, so there will be an API or application programming interface that can be integrated within software systems. And we're also planning on having like a graphical user interface, web form to input RAiD metadata as well. So we would need organizations to test those mechanisms in whatever way makes the most sense for your context. So test that RAiD registration process and provide feedback on how that's working for you. As Sean mentioned, RAiD does have its own metadata schema, and there is a configurable section where it can be customized. So we would love to work with you all to get your feedback on that and really hone that registration process and make sure it meets the needs of all the stakeholders. And of course, we will be creating documentation throughout this pilot. I mentioned earlier, we are working on determining a sustainable business model. And so pilot organizations would be providing feedback on those discussions. Everyone's input will be very valuable as we move forward. So that will be part of it too. And then ultimately, it would be great if pilot organizations that have tested the registration process and are starting to use RAiD would be willing to share your own insights and experiences with the broader community. So right now we're at the beginning. So we're starting small. We have a relatively small group of initial stakeholders right now, but as time goes on, we're going to be spreading and sharing more information and hopefully getting more organizations involved. So we would love your input on that part as well, and kind of spreading the word. We're probably going to have, multiple webinars and things like that. We would love to have case studies and insights presented there. So that's what we're thinking as of right now for what this pilot participation would entail. So that first step, thinking about your potential RAiD use cases, we do have a submission form, and we'll share the link in the chat. The link is also available in the agenda doc that I shared earlier. But it's a pretty basic form, just asking you for some initial information about how you're thinking about using RAiD. And this will help us be organized and keep track of all of the submissions, and we'll get in touch with you after to get any additional details and start working with you to move forward and go through all those steps that I talked about on the last slide. So with that brings us to the end of our official presentation. I am